So thrilled to have my first guest tonight. Wally Matthews covered New York sports for, more than 35 years. He was a boxing writer, a baseball writer, a general columnist for, I believe, every single paper in New York City at one point or another. He also hosted a Drive Time sports show on sports radio and worked as a TV boxing commentator. The reason I knew that Wally Matthews was the real deal is because my grandfather, who was a huge boxing, he wasn't even a fan, he was the true fanatic, used to read Wally Matthews' column every time it was in the newspaper because, as he said, Wally knew his stuff. So, Wally, welcome to BT Talks.
Well, thank you, Brett. I wish I had gotten to meet your grandfather. It sounds like I could have used a few more of him.
Well,
Maybe he'd still be in the business.
Listen, you wouldn't have forgotten if you met my grandfather. He would have talked plenty of boxing, and him and my Uncle Marty, who's listening tonight, who is my grandfather's son, big boxing fans from Long Island, Patchogue, Massapequa and Patchogue. So they always respected your knowledge of the fight game, and it wasn't too many people that my grandfather respected the knowledge of the fight game. So great. You were on the top of his list.
Well, tell Uncle Marty that me and him are going to have a beer one of these days.
You just told him yourself. He's down in Atlanta. You and I can fly down. Hey, Wally, I certainly, as somebody who, grew up reading the New York dailies and really appreciated your style, which was, a no-nonsense, tell it like it is, sports column, which we don't really get much of today. Everything has to be, politically correct or this or that. What's your take on... I want to talk about boxing. I want to talk about baseball. I want to talk about, in general. But what's your take on the way that sports are covered today? And do you feel that it's become, sanitized too much?
Well, yeah. And the reason is because a lot of these guys practice access journalism. And, they rely on sources to leak them things so that they can say on Twitter, I had this first, or on Facebook, first with the news, this. It's not important anymore, but for some reason, this is the feather that these guys want to put in their caps. And not only guys, men and women. And unfortunately, if you're going to do that kind of journalism, you got to make deals basically with the people you cover. Yes, I'll write this for you if you tell me that. And at that point, you're no longer a journalist. Now you're a PR man. And unfortunately, that's what a lot of these people have become. They are so addicted to getting credit for scooping other outlets and other reporters that they are making deals. It's called access journalism. It's like, don't piss off your source because he won't tell you anything anymore. Now, I'll tell you one thing, and I'm not saying this is a badge of honor, but when I started in the business in 1983, that kind of stuff was not only looked down upon, it was scorned. I mean, it was really, you were considered to be a hack if you did that. And quite frankly, I covered the heavyweight champion, Mike Tyson, for 3 years, and he wouldn't talk to me. And I didn't care about whether he gave me access or not, because I knew that I was going to cover the stories. I was going to get everything I needed, whether he spoke to me or not. Same thing happened when I covered the Yankees. I mean, the manager hated my guts. I'm not going to say which manager, but, he really did not like me. And the only time he would talk to me was in a public press conference, and that was fine with me. I didn't need him to, whisper sweet nothings in my ear in the dugout like he was doing with other guys. I was asking my questions in a public forum, make him answer me in front of everybody with the cameras on. I'll get the same stuff everybody else gets. But unfortunately, it seems like the new generation of journalists doesn't think that way. They think they have to make alliances with people, and that, by its nature, compromises your coverage.
You mentioned Mike Tyson, and you wrote so much, as you mentioned, about Tyson throughout his career. And one of the columns that stuck with me, and I think it was a more recent column, not while he was actually fighting, but you were looking back and at first took me by surprise, and then read your column, and you really made it makes a lot of sense, which I guess is your job, so you did a good job. Was when you called Mike, you were talking about how Buster Douglas defeating Mike Tyson could not be one of the greatest sports upsets of all time because Mike Tyson is probably the most overrated either boxer or athlete. I don't remember how you put it, of all time. Not because wasn't a beast, and not because Buster Douglas didn't have a good night, but because of the competition that Tyson faced. You want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. Well, this is really what I was saying. You judge a fighter by who he loses to and how he loses to them, not really by who he beats. Okay. And there's never been a great heavyweight champion in history who was knocked out in every one of his defeats, who never got off the canvas to win, who actually quit in his last two fights, and you can make the argument that he quit against Holyfield in the Yearby fight because that certainly was a way out. He knew, he's going to get disqualified if he does this, but he was willing to do it. I mean, look in the record of any great heavyweight champion, from Joe Louis, Muhammad Ali, Jack Johnson, Jack Dempsey, Evander Holyfield, Larry Holmes, George Foreman. You will not find anything like that. Every one of them got off the canvas to win. Larry Holmes did it against Ernie Shavers and against Snipes by punches that would have knocked out most people. He got up and knocked out those other two guys. He got up off the canvas and won. Joe Frazier knocked down twice in the first round by Oscar Bonavena, got up to beat him. Joe Louis knocked down by Jim Braddock in the fight that he won the title. He got off the canvas and beat him. Just you name it. George Foreman's great fight against Ron Lyle. He was knocked down twice and got up and won a tremendous slugfest. Jack Dempsey was knocked down by Firpo, knocked out of the ring, got back in and knocked him out. Every time Tyson hit the canvas, he lost the fight. Okay? Go look at it. Happened in 5 different fights. Every single one of them, he lost. Quitting against Kevin McBride, quitting against Danny Williams, just sitting in your corner and saying, I don't want to do this anymore, that immediately disqualifies you from being a great fighter, as far as I'm concerned. Now, that's not to say he wasn't a great phenomenon. He wasn't a great puncher. He absolutely was must-see television. The world stopped when he fought, and we were all excited to see it, and I was excited to cover him. I mean, I won't deny that a bit. But if you're going to try to put him in the same class with Muhammad Ali, if you're going to put him in the same class with George Foreman or Evander Holyfield or Holmes or Frazier or Lewis, it just doesn't work. It does not work. Just compare with the way their career arcs went, and you see that there's absolutely no comparison. Was he more exciting than them? Maybe on certain nights. Did he have a bigger audience? Absolutely, because of the technology. Did he make more money than them? Yes. But none of this, you can't confuse excitement or money making with greatness.
And this is why my grandfather and uncle say you know your stuff, because clearly you know your stuff. You see,
I love those two guys. I've never even met them.
Well, I said when I told my uncle that you were going to be on with me tonight, I said, do you have any questions that you'd like me to? And I'm letting Uncle Marty ask a question now, which was, do you think? And this is before your time of covering boxing, but like I said, you know the game so well. Do you feel Sugar Ray Robinson is the greatest of all time? And if not, who would be?
No, I do think he was. I think he was because he was dominant as a welterweight, and I've seen enough film of him. And I got to meet him a couple of times. It was a thrill. He was one of the few people that, I was kind of speechless when I met him. The other one was Muhammad Ali, the first time I met him. But, I mean, he was dominant as a welterweight. He was excellent, if not dominant, as a middleweight, which was way out of his weight class. And he probably would have won the light heavyweight title if he didn't wilt in like 100 and some odd degree heat in Yankee Stadium against Joey Maxim. I mean, this guy, we look at what Roberto Duran has done. He's done tremendous things. And, he might be right up there as among the greatest. This guy went from 135 to winning a title at 168. That's just an incredible accomplishment. Some of the guys he beat, and he almost beat Marvin Hagler. Very, very impressive. But Robinson did the same thing, and he fought something like 150 times. And when I wrote his obit, because, he passed away in the early 90s, and I called Teddy Brenner, who was his matchmaker at before Top Rank. He was his matchmaker at Madison Square Garden for many years. And he said to me, don't judge Robinson by those last 50 fights. He said, the first 125, those were the real Ray Robinson. And I let that sink in for a minute. I said, the first 125? That's like 3 careers today.
Unbelievable. Unbelievable.
Like, let's judge him by those first 125 fights. After that, he wasn't the same guy. So, I mean, yeah, to me, he's on another stratosphere.
You started covering boxing in the early 80s, and, there was so many, boxing was so different then, and I'm not even sure it's a shadow of what it was, but when you had guys like the other Sugar Ray, right? Sugar Ray Leonard, Tommy Hearns, Roberto Duran, Hagler, Holmes, Spinks.
By the way, the other Sugar Ray was pretty goddamn
Yeah,
good.
no, absolutely. I mean, do you think that that was really, those 80s fighters was really, considering what you said earlier about, your opponent, I mean, those fights between Hearns and Hagler and Duran and Leonard. I mean, was that the golden age in your mind?
Well, let me just say this. Everybody thinks the golden age is when they were covering it, right? I mean, there's no doubt. People who covered Dempsey think the 20s was the golden age, and people who covered Lewis think the 40s was the golden age. I think that you can make the case that the 80s were, because not only were there a lot of great fighters, but the fights were getting made. I mean, look, I don't follow boxing nearly as closely as I used to, and quite honestly, that's boxing's fault. It ain't mine. All right, it's because they don't make the fights anymore. And I certainly read, boxing Twitter, and I keep up a little bit with what's going on, and I see that the fans are so frustrated that you never got, Wilder and Joshua into the ring together. You never, you still haven't seen Bud Crawford and Spence in the ring together. You might never see a third fight between Golovkin and Canelo. So I think that back then there was more of a sense of pride, and it wasn't just the money. I mean, because the easy argument is, well, these guys make so much money now they don't have to fight each other. Leonard, Hagler, Hearns, Duran, they were making a lot of money too. They could have easily fought, once a year or avoided one another, but they didn't. There was a different sense of pride back then. It was like, I want to prove that I am the best. I don't want to just walk around with some, as my favorite all-time fighter, Iran Barkley, used to say, I'm not going to walk around with a tuna fish can belt around my waist. Meaning, the belt was a piece of junk and it meant nothing. He wanted to fight the best guys.
Right.
And I think Leonard wanted that. Hagler wanted that. Duran wanted that. And you saw them do it. Hearns wanted that. I mean, to me, there's probably never been a more gallant loser in boxing history than Tommy Hearns. I mean, every time this guy fought, win or lose, he was willing to die, and go out on his shield. And you don't see that anymore, unfortunately. And maybe it is because, these guys have it too comfortable. Right away you're making $1 million, for a pay-per-view fight. Maybe you feel like you don't have to put yourself out there. You're afraid to risk your record. You don't want to drop to zero. Who knows? All I know is in the 80s, everybody wanted to fight everybody else. And that's really the big difference.
All right, I'm going to shift to baseball, but we'll continue the boxing conversation with my Uncle Marty and you and me in a bar at some point very soon. You mentioned you covered the Yankees, you covered baseball, you had a baseball podcast, but in more recent years, I know you had become kind of disenchanted with the game and what the game had become. Where do you think, forget about the lockout that's going on right now, but where do you think baseball is right now, and do you have faith that it can come back to be the great sport it once was?
First of all, let me just tell you, I'm not disenchanted with the game. I love baseball. Absolutely love baseball. And the reason I love baseball is the same reason I love boxing. Because to me, it's a series of one-on-one confrontations, right? It's pitcher against batter over and over and over. And every one of them is a new drama. And, I love that. I really do. What I am disenchanted with is the direction that baseball is being taken by the commissioner, by the owners, and in some cases by the Players Association. I mean, does anybody really like the idea of 7-inning doubleheaders? I mean, what is this, Little League? Does anybody really like the idea of starting a runner at second base in extra innings? Right. Does anybody like the idea of robo-umpires calling balls and strikes? To me, the human element is part of baseball. I don't even like replay. I understand everybody wants to get it right, but it slows the game down, which is already slow to begin with. And sometimes games turn on calls like that, yes, but there is a human element. And you want to know something? I would think, and I'm only speaking anecdotally, majority of the times the umpires get it right with their eyes, with their naked eyes. I mean, I really think it's kind of an insult to say, and I realize some umpires have, terrible strike zones and all, but this is the same. This is what the players have always told me. They have no problem with the strike zone as long as the umpire is equally bad for both teams.
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly.
It's like, as long as I understand what's a strike and what's a ball, and it's going to be the same for the other guys, I'm fine with it.
Makes total sense. Makes total sense. Wally Matthews, I could talk to you all night. You are sorely missed on the New York sports landscape, but I can't thank you enough for spending a few minutes with me here today on BT Talks.
Not a problem. I enjoyed it, man. Anytime.
Have a great night. All right, the great Wally Matthews. We're going to take a 60-second break, and we'll be back with Islanders radio voice Chris King.